Nobody agrees on the exact year. That's the part nobody tells you. Ask 10 historians when the gun was invented, and you'll get 10 different centuries. Some will say the 9th, some will say the 13th. One or two will get cagey and start talking about gradual processes instead of giving you a straight answer, which is historian speak for "we genuinely don't know and we'd rather not admit it on camera." That should bother you more than it does. We know when the printing press was invented, we know when the light bulb flickered on, we know when the airplane left the ground for the first time down to the minute because someone was standing there with a stopwatch. But the single most consequential piece of technology in the history of human violence, the machine that ended empires, closed the Age of Knights, and eventually decided who got to colonize whom, doesn't have a birthday, it has a blur. A window stretching across roughly 400 years, somewhere between an accidental laboratory explosion and a battlefield weapon nobody quite remembers building on purpose. So the real question isn't how the gun got invented. Plenty of documentaries have already walked you through that part. The real question, the one almost nobody sits with long enough to feel uncomfortable, is why can't we pin down the date? And once you understand why, you'll understand something a little unsettling about how all major human inventions actually happen, which is to say, almost never on purpose and almost never on a single day anyone bothered to write down. Let's start with the earliest fixed point we actually have, because it's earlier than most people assume and stranger than most people assume too. In 1128, a stone relief was carved into a cave wall in Sichuan, China. It depicts a figure, likely a demon or protective deity, the carvings aren't entirely clear on that point, holding what appears to be a pear-shaped vessel with flame and projectiles bursting from its mouth. Archaeologists call it, somewhat dryly, the earliest known depiction of a firearm. Notice the wording, not the earliest firearm, the earliest known depiction of one, which means the object itself, the actual physical weapon being drawn, already existed before anyone thought to carve it into rock. The invention predates the evidence of the invention. That gap right there between an object existing and someone bothering to document it is going to become the theme of this entire story. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. Chemically, gunpowder had already been around for roughly 2 centuries by the time that carving was made. Formulas for the mixture, saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, show up in Chinese military and alchemical texts as early as the mid-800s. That means for 200 years, give or take, humans possessed a substance capable of violent explosive combustion, and by every surviving record, mostly used it to make things sparkle. Fireworks, signal flares, ceremonial noise for festivals and funerals. 2 centuries is longer than the entire lifespan of the United States. Imagine sitting on the ingredients for gunpowder weaponry for that long and using it primarily to celebrate birthdays. Why the delay? This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the honest answer isn't technological, it's psychological. Explosive force and weaponized explosive force are not the same idea, and the leap between them apparently isn't obvious even to people holding the raw material in their hands. You need someone to look at a controlled explosion and think specifically, this could kill a person if I aimed it correctly, which sounds like an obvious thought in hindsight, the way most obvious thoughts do once somebody else has had them for you. Somewhere in that 200-year gap, somebody finally had it. We don't know who, we don't know exactly when. What we know is that by the 12th century, gunpowder had migrated from spectacle to spear, strapped onto bamboo tubes that spat flame at attacking soldiers during sieges. And this is where the dating problem gets worse instead of better, because military texts from this era were often written or revised decades after the events they describe, meaning the date historians assign to early gunpowder weapons is frequently an estimate built on an estimate, a best guess wearing the costume of a fact. Now fast forward, and pay attention to how fast this forward actually is, because the acceleration itself is the twist nobody frames correctly. Bamboo tubes gave way to metal barrels sometime in the 1200s. We have a genuinely solid archaeological anchor here, a bronze hand cannon unearthed in Heilongjiang province, radiocarbon and stylistically dated to somewhere around 1288. Hold that number. It's one of the few dates in this entire narrative that archaeologists will actually commit to without hedging. But, and here's the uncomfortable twist, even that date only tells you when one specific object was made, not when the category of object was invented. It's the difference between finding the oldest surviving photograph and knowing the exact day photography was invented. The object proves the technology existed by that date. It says nothing certain about how much earlier it might have existed, quietly, undocumented, in workshops nobody thought were worth writing about. This pattern, invention happening quietly, years or decades before anyone writes it down, is going to repeat itself across almost every first you've ever heard cited with confidence. Take Europe. Most timelines will tell you gunpowder weapons arrived there around the 1320s, spreading through trade routes and conquest. Fine, but the earliest European illustration of a gun, a manuscript held in Oxford showing a vase-shaped cannon firing a single dart, is dated to 1326. Once again, not the invention, the drawing of the invention. The actual arrival of functional gunpowder weaponry on European soil almost certainly predates that illustration, possibly by years, because someone had to build the thing before an illustrator sat down to sketch it for a manuscript nobody was rushing to finish. Do you see the shape of the problem now? Every first we cite is really just the earliest surviving proof, not the earliest actual event, and proof is fragile. Proof burns and fires, rots and floods, gets tossed out by someone's descendants who don't realize what they're throwing away, which means the true invention date of the gun, the real one, the one nobody will ever recover, is almost certainly earlier than anything currently written in a textbook, possibly by decades, possibly, in the most extreme scholarly estimates, by the better part of a century. This should reframe something for you. We like to imagine history as a clean timeline, dates in bold text, arrows pointing forward, cause neatly followed by effect, but major inventions don't actually behave that way. They behave more like disease outbreaks, quiet, undetected transmission for an unknown stretch of time, followed by a sudden visible outbreak that historians mistake for the beginning, when it was actually just the moment the thing finally got loud enough to notice. And once the gun did get loud enough to notice, the acceleration became almost violent in its own right. Matchlocks by the 1400s, wheellocks by the early 1500s, flintlocks locking in a design so effective it dominated global warfare for roughly 200 consecutive years, virtually unchanged, an astonishing stretch of technological stability sandwiched between centuries of near total silence on either side. Percussion caps arrived in the early 1800s and rendered every previous mechanism obsolete within a single human lifetime, the fastest phase of change in this entire multi-century arc, occurring at the exact moment written record-keeping finally caught up with the pace of invention. Which means the only part of this story we can date with real confidence is the part that happened most recently. Everything further back gets progressively blurrier, not because less was happening, but because fewer people were writing it down as it happened. So when did humans invent the gun? The honest answer is that you're asking the wrong kind of question about the wrong kind of event. There was no morning when someone woke up, built the first gun before breakfast, and wrote the date in a ledger. There was a slow, mostly invisible accumulation of small decisions made by people whose names didn't survive, spread across a window of roughly 2 to 4 centuries, only becoming visible to us in the handful of moments someone happened to carve it into stone, sketch it into a manuscript, or bury it in the ground where it would wait 800 years to be dug back up.
And that's the part worth sitting with for a second, because it isn't really a story about guns anymore. It's a story about how little of human history actually got written down while it was happening. Almost everything you've ever learned as a clean, confident date, the invention of this, the discovery of that, is a first surviving trace dressed up in the language of certainty because uncertainty doesn't fit neatly into a textbook sentence. which means somewhere behind every first you've ever memorized, there's a real first, a real person on a real day doing something for the first time that history simply never noticed. No name, no date, no stone carving, just a moment that happened and vanished the way almost every moment in human history actually does, whether or not anyone was there to write it down. We are, all of us, living through thousands of those unrecorded firsts right now, today, in this exact moment. Decisions and accidents that will shape centuries we'll never see, and that no one, anywhere, is bothering to carve into stone.